Adirondack Explorer magazine recently brought together some of the members of that task force and other stakeholders at the Wild Center in Tupper Lake to talk about where now, 6 months later, the state and communities are implementing pilot programs and the task force's recommendations.
We've identified a major issue, an increasing trend in the concentration of chloride statewide, including in the Adirondacks, and it's something that we need to start to identify the various sources, including road salt, and then start to think about solutions. And I think the road salt task force was a major component of the solution, right? Starting to look at best management practices and things that we can do to impact the actual application of road salt and probably reduce what I think we expect is the biggest source of chloride contamination.
From a DOT standpoint, again, our charge is to maintain our roads in a safe manner. We believe that for the class of roadways that we have, higher speed, generally higher volume, we believe that road salt needs to be part of that equation. We believe certainly we need to manage it and use as little as possible, but we do believe road salt needs to be part of that equation.
So in order to keep building on progress, we need agencies to come together and experts from across the state to come together. And then from there, we need to be thinking about implementation. We're so thrilled to see the state making progress on the pilots. That feels like the most important thing to continue. But how do we begin charting a course for implementation on all the other great recommendations in the report? And then finally, how are we going to pay for it?
It's an important issue here in the Adirondacks, and we've been writing about it for a long time, and frankly, haven't seen all that much progress. There are good things being done here and there, but we really need, the state, which drops so much salt on our roads, to really do its part. And I think that this road salt task force and the report that came out are a really great step in that direction. And so we wanted to have this workshop to kind of talk about what's next and really kind of nail down what are the priorities.
And Sawyer Bailey, the executive director of ADK Action, one of the nonprofits working on the road salt reduction project, joins us now. Welcome back. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
The idea of this summit a couple of weeks ago was what's next, where to go from here?
Exactly. This is sort of where the rubber meets the road in terms of implementing the Adirondack Road Salt Reduction Task Force report. And I'm so excited that the Adirondack Explorer took the opportunity to convene a whole bunch of different leaders and perspectives to give their thoughts on what is next.
What are some of the takeaways from the task force report and recommendations? Where do things go from here?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, and it's one that ADK Action and a number of nonprofit partners across the region considered as soon as it came out. Came out in late summer, an awful long report with a lot of great data and information and 60 some odd recommendations. So a lot to really consider. But as soon as we read this, we knew we had to get together with partners like the Ausable River Association, the Adirondack Council, Paul Smith's College, and the Adirondack Watershed Institute to think, how can we be as strategic and collaborative as possible to implement these great recommendations? The way we saw it is recommendations span from action at the state level to implement a series of pilot projects. How can they do some really quick, innovative trials, learn from them, and then implement them statewide? There's also a number of recommendations around increasing best management practice training for our highway crews. And then how do we help those who have had their private water wells polluted by salt? So everything from science behind road salt to remediation from contamination. And reading this report, partners said, okay, we need to make sure that there is a body in place to really see to it that this is implemented thoughtfully. The task force that was convened to brainstorm these recommendations, we don't expect will be heavily involved in that implementation, so we need to see some sort of interagency or multi-expert council created to think about the implementation game plan, and it probably needs a few staff members that can work to make sure what's discussed actually comes to fruition. We also realized that there need to be some guardrails up for how much road salt pollution is too much. We're one of the only states in the Northeast that doesn't have chloride standard. that says, okay, this is the threshold across the state for an allowable level of road salt pollution. And we think that's a place to start. That's one of the key recommendations in the task force report, to establish the level held in the Clean Water Act. And then once that's implemented, work it down in places that are sensitive, like the Adirondack Park. And then finally, how do we see to it that the rest of those 60 some odd recommendations are implemented? And then how do we fund it? That's something partners thought an awful lot about, especially in this budget climate where there's not a lot of extra funds to work with.
You testified before one of the budget hearings. Was that one of the recommendations? Let's start talking about where we can get resources for these recommendations.
It was, yes. I was lucky enough to be able to testify in front of the Joint Legislature Department of Transportation budget hearing, and that's exactly what I shared with them. I talked about how too many of my neighbors really have been impacted with their wells, with road salt pollution. And I asked the joint legislature to please consider implementing that funding through savings plan. We have to start somewhere, so let's try to be as practical as possible.
The recommendations, you mentioned 60 some, any already being implemented?
Yes. In the 2 years waiting for the report to come out, we knew that there was eventually going to be state-level action. But in that time, we realized there was a window of opportunity to help our town and county highway crews really have the latest and greatest information, resources, and community of support they need to reduce road salt. So over the past 2 years, we've been working with over 25 town and county highway crews to help get them the best technical expertise to help them reduce their use of salt and sand.
And are many of them already embracing this?
Many of them are. I really think we're at a critical moment right now when it comes to road salt reduction. I think early in change-making efforts, you're talking to the folks who are the most innovative, the most likely to try something new, but I think we're at a tipping point right now where we're seeing this become a majority-held view, and I think the majority of our municipalities and counties in the park agree it's time to change.
You've met with highway departments in recent weeks in Clinton County and just within the past week in Franklin County as well. Are they already utilizing the technology, or are they just sort of learning about it now with a goal of perhaps starting to use it within the next few years?
Yes and yes. It's been extremely moving to see that many of these plow operators, mechanics, highway superintendents see the change in their community and they're excited about trying something new. They're not going to let "this is how we've always done it" stop us from "we're going to do better than ever before." So we are seeing new technology being implemented. We're seeing a lot more measuring of what's going on the road, and more standardization across, even the back of a plow gate. What are we calibrating that opening to make sure that we know how much salt is going on the road and it's not an ounce more than we need?
A number of these steps have been taken for a number of years now by communities in and around Lake George. The town of Hague reporting that they've reduced salt use by 60%. And so are they really who the other communities are looking to?
I think that they were an early test case to prove to the rest of us that this is not just possible, but it's extremely gratifying and worthwhile. But since then, we've actually seen a number of towns follow in Lake George and Hague's lead. The town of Peru is one of those amazing examples. Highway Superintendent Mike Farrell and his deputy Tyler Jarvis have just done an amazing job of really creating a culture change in their town and bringing on their whole crew, town residents, and saying, we are going to prove the model for using anti-icing technology with salt brine. We are going to be, again, calibrating all our trucks. We're going to be using remote sensing cameras. We're going to be using ambient air temperature trackers. They've got the latest and greatest, and they're an influencer around the park. In fact, Mike came with me to a recent meeting with Franklin County highway superintendents, and everyone had so many questions for Mike. He's such a wonderful ambassador, and we're really seeing this grow across the entire park.
And they're already using alternatives like brine?
Yes.
Or are they using salt but just less salt?
They're using salt brine on the majority of their routes, and what's good about brine, even though it's road salt, it's a lower concentration. Road salt is only really active once water hits it. So the fact that brine is a saltwater mixture, and it's a 27% saltwater mixture compared to 100% concentrated road salt, that not only melts snow as soon as it starts to fall because the brine goes on before the storm starts, but it starts melting right on contact, and it uses less salt. So it's quite incredible.
There are 4 pilot programs you mentioned right now. All 4 of those mostly using the brine and seeing how effective that is?
I believe 2 of them are using an all-liquid route. The pilot that's being done in Harrietstown through Route 30, that's just a lower salt application trial.
How many communities collectively do you think now are thinking about this and perhaps trying these alternative methods?
We worked with 6 towns last winter, one of which was Washington County, and it was a wonderful experience for us to work with the county highway department, which has essentially 9 barns, 9 different departments within it. So we worked with an entity at that scale. We also worked with very small individual towns that don't have a massive highway budget to deal with. So we were able to treat that as our pilot year. We were also lucky enough to receive some private support to grow this effort across the entire park. And since then, we are now working with 26 towns, including some additional counties and a wide variety of municipalities. And I think next year we'll see even more join our work.
And why the concern? Why the urgency? What is the threat from road salt?
I'm glad you asked, because I think there's a lot of coverage these days about what we're doing about it, but there's still too many folks who don't understand why it's a problem. We're only beginning to catch on to it now that it's really quite a substantial issue. In 2019, ADK Action really wanted to get our arms around the scope of this problem, and we sponsored a research study with the Adirondack Watershed Institute to test nearly 500 private wells. We suspected road salt pollution would show up there, and unfortunately we were right. We saw over 50% of those wells showing road salt contamination. For some, it's a small degree of contamination, but it's greater than what you would see without the impact of road salt. And for others, they were testing water that was brackish, the same kind of quality you'd see flowing into the ocean, that degree of salt, 1,000 milligrams per liter.
And that's drinking water.
And that's drinking water. And if that is flowing through pipes in a house that was built before 1987, it might have lead pipes. So we're corroding lead pipes, which has a host of health concerns. It's also forcing folks to replace things like washers and dishwashers more frequently, not to mention that if they can't drink it, they're spending their time and money to find other water they can drink. And that's just drinking water. I haven't even begun to really quantify the impact we're seeing on our freshwater resources, places we fish, we swim, where ecosystems that are delicate can be impacted, and we think at least 50% of our Adirondack water could be jeopardized by road salt.
Did you get the sense when you were in Albany that the governor, lawmakers, and state agencies are concerned and want to address this?
The governor ushered in strong appointments to the Road Salt Task Force and really ushered in the release of the report after all that time. So we do know it's a priority for her administration. We just realized there's a number of competing concerns with a problem like this that has so many complicated factors to it. It's a social issue, an environmental issue, an economic issue, and yes, it's a political issue. So we are just looking for windows of practical opportunity to help her administration do what we know is right.
And what about a timetable? The 4 pilot projects are underway this winter, then what after that?
The DOT is required to release a progress report on those pilots come August. But from there, we think there really does need to be a timetable for implementation. And we think that there's opportunities in the next 4 years to implement every single one of those recommendations, not just in the Adirondack Park, but then to scale them statewide by 2030. The Adirondacks are the canary in the coal mine for this issue, but really it's of statewide concern.
Sawyer Bailey, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.